I am sitting dead center at table 4 in the crystal room of the St. Regis. The air smells like vintage champagne and cheap morals. Trevon, my husband of 5 years, stands at the podium for his firm's charity gala. He is turning on that blinding charismatic smile that hides the absolute cruelty underneath. After auctioning off Cabo vacations and sports cars, he points his mahogany gavel right at me. And for our final joke item of the night, who wants this useless wife? She works in her pajamas and burns toast. Do I hear $50? The room of 200 elites erupts in laughter. Beside me, my white sister-in-law Chloe snickers behind her manicured hand, leaning into my brother-in-law Jamal. I sit perfectly still, smoothing the fabric of my dress, letting Trevon think he is the king of the room. He raises his gavel ready to declare me completely worthless, when a voice from the shadows stops his hand mid-air. $3 million. The deep, commanding voice cuts through the ballroom. The roaring laughter dies instantly. Xavier, the legendary venture capitalist and CEO of Apex Solutions, steps into the light of the crystal chandelier holding his paddle high. Trevon's smug smile melts into sheer panic. He needs Xavier's firm to buy out his failing company, and he just insulted a woman Xavier is looking at with absolute reverence. Before the gavel can drop, we freeze the moment. How did the useless wife end up with a billionaire defending her honor? We rewind 6 months to see the invisible empire I was building while Trevon was busy digging his own grave. It is a Tuesday evening at a family dinner at Jamal and Chloe's sprawling suburban house. Trevon loudly mocks my little at-home data entry gig, boasting about his impending promotion to senior vice president. He swirls his expensive bourbon, a drink he cannot actually afford, and tells the table how I spend my days clicking spreadsheets while he swims with the sharks. Chloe hands me a stack of dirty dessert plates with a condescending smile. "It is so brave of you to just be comfortable with doing nothing all day, Kendra," she says, patting my shoulder. I do not argue. I just smile, washing her dishes, knowing exactly who I am and what I am worth. I let them enjoy their delusion because my phone buzzes in my pocket with an alert that is about to change my life. The next morning at the grocery store, my debit card declines. Trevon has drained our joint account to buy a Rolex to look the part for his bosses, leaving me stranded at the register. He texts me to figure it out, saying success costs money. I do not cry. I simply pull out a sleek, heavy black metal card from my private wallet to pay. Trevon thinks I do data entry. He has no idea I am the sole architect and founder of Nova Analytics. I spent the last 3 years building the entire ecosystem from scratch, using Kotlin and MVVM architecture, all running smoothly on a secure Firebase backend. It is a predictive financial algorithm that is currently revolutionizing the sector. As I load my groceries into the trunk, my lead developer calls. The firm Trevon works for is going bankrupt and desperately begging for a buyout from a parent company. The parent company Trevon's firm is begging for salvation from is Apex Solutions, the very same Apex Solutions that has been courting Nova Analytics for a massive acquisition. I realize the absolute poetry of the situation. Trevon's professional survival is entirely dependent on the company that is about to make me a multimillionaire. I decide it is time to stop hiding in the shadows. I schedule a face-to-face meeting with Apex's CEO Xavier to close my deal and secure my crown. I walk into the sleek, high-rise downtown offices of Apex Solutions. No more sweatpants. I am wearing a sharp, tailored power suit. I sit across from Xavier, who looks at my code and my business model with absolute respect. There is no condescension in his eyes, only the recognition of an equal. We finalize the paperwork. Apex is acquiring my algorithm for a massive 8-figure payout, but I retain creative control, a seat on the board, and majority shares in several of their subsidiaries, including the one Trevon works for. Xavier offers a toast to my new empire. But when I get home, reality comes crashing back in the form of a familiar betrayal. I walk into my house to find Trevon hastily packing a bag for a weekend business retreat. While he is in the shower, I find a receipt for diamond earrings in his jacket pocket, earrings that never made it to my jewelry box. His phone lights up on the nightstand. A text from his junior analyst, Jasmine, reading that she cannot wait for their weekend. He has been funding his affair with the joint account money he swore was for networking. Instead of confronting him and giving him the satisfaction of my tears, I slip the receipt back into his pocket. I have a much grander stage in mind for his destruction. Trevon returns from his retreat and demands I accompany him to his firm's upcoming charity gala. He needs to play the devoted family man because Xavier will be there, and Trevon's promotion depends entirely on Xavier's approval. Trevon tosses a cheap clearance rack dress onto the bed and tells me to just stand there, look pretty, and do not embarrass him. I look at the cheap fabric, pull out my phone, and text Xavier a single word. Tonight. The trap is officially set. We arrive at the St. Regis. Trevon immediately abandons me at table 4 to go schmooze with the executives. I sit quietly in my cheap dress watching the room. Jamal and Chloe arrive. Jamal is sweating his own branch of the firm failing while Chloe struts around like she owns the building. Chloe spots me sitting alone and zeroes in on her target armed with a full glass of wine. Chloe deliberately trips and spills a splash of white wine right onto the hem of my dress. She gives a fake, breathless apology saying she is so sorry and knows I cannot afford dry cleaning, telling me to send her the bill. I do not break eye contact. I calmly dab the spot with a napkin, warning her with a chillingly calm voice that messes are often much harder to clean up than they look. Chloe scoffs and walks away, but she is immediately replaced by someone far more insidious. Jasmine, Trevon's mistress, approaches my table. She is wearing the diamond earrings Trevon bought with my grocery money. She pretends to make small talk, but accidentally mentions how Trevon is planning to move into a luxury downtown condo next month, testing the waters to see how blind I truly am. I remain icy and elegantly poised, letting her dig her own grave, knowing she is chasing a man whose pockets are completely empty. Trevon, drunk on his own ego and desperate for Xavier's attention, takes the stage to run the charity auction, leading us right back to the opening moment. We snap back to the present. The room is dead silent after Xavier's $3 million bid. Trevon stammers, gripping the podium, trying to turn it back into a joke. He tells Mr. Xavier he was just joking about the wife and that he does not have to bid. Xavier cuts him off, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. I am not bidding on a wife, Trevon. I am bidding $3 million for a single hour of this woman's consulting time. Trevon's brain short-circuits. Xavier turns to the crowd and the real introduction begins. Xavier addresses the elite crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce Kendra, the billionaire founder of Nova Analytics, my new business partner, and as of this morning, the majority shareholder of the firm Trevon currently works for. The ballroom gasps collectively. Chloe drops her champagne glass. It shatters against the marble floor. Jamal's jaw hits the table. Trevon turns ghostly pale, sweating, profusely staring at me as I slowly stand up, smooth my clearance rack dress, and walk purposefully toward the stage. I walk up the steps and take the microphone directly from Trevon's shaking hand. I look him dead in the eye in front of his colleagues, his mistress, and the city's elite. I do not yell. I speak with surgical precision. I dismantle his ego piece by piece, exposing his drained accounts, his utter incompetence at work, and his complete reliance on the very firm I now own. The crowd is stunned into absolute silence as Trevon realizes the useless wife holds his entire life in the palm of her hand. The gala dissolves into frantic whispers as the elite scramble to process the power shift. Trevon pulls me into a private VIP room, panicking. He begs me to say it is a prank, calling me baby and reaching for my hands. I calmly open my designer clutch and hand him a thick manila envelope containing divorce papers. I tell him to sign them. Or my first act as majority shareholder tomorrow morning is auditing his expense accounts. I tell him I know about Jasmine. Trevon collapses into a chair. Broken, but the door bursts open before he can sign. Jamal and Chloe rush into the room, their previous condescension entirely vanished. Jamal's branch of the firm is bleeding money, and he begs me to protect his job. Chloe attempts to play the sisterhood card, smiling nervously. I expertly shut her down, reminding her of the wine stain and her years of racial and social microaggressions. I tell Chloe she wanted me to be comfortable doing nothing all day, and starting tomorrow, doing nothing is exactly what her husband will be doing, because Jamal is fired. Chloe bursts into tears, but the drama is not over. Jasmine steps into the doorway. Jasmine overhears the entire conversation. She realizes that Trevon is entirely broke, buried in debt, and about to be fired by his own wife. The luxurious future he promised her was a complete lie. Disgusted, she takes off the diamond earrings, throws them hard at Trevon's chest, and walks out of the VIP room without a backward glance. Trevon is left utterly alone, surrounded by the shattered pieces of his fake life as I turn on my heel and walk out into the night. A fast-forward sequence takes us to 3 months later. Trevon is facing total bankruptcy. He is living in a tiny, cramped studio apartment, forced to sell his luxury car and his designer suits just to pay his mounting legal fees. Jamal and Chloe have had to severely downsize their lavish lifestyle, their social standing utterly destroyed within our community. The people who looked down on me are now looking up from the absolute bottom. I close the chapter on them forever, leaving them to the misery they built for themselves. I am standing on the sprawling balcony of my new ultra-modern penthouse overlooking the city skyline. Nova Analytics is thriving. My bank accounts reflect my true worth, and my peace is untouchable. Xavier and I share a professional mutual respect that hints at a powerful, unstoppable future partnership. I reflect on the journey, smiling as the city lights reflect in my glass. I did not just survive the auction block, I bought the whole damn building. It takes a certain kind of strength to let people misunderstand you while you build your empire in the shadows. I learned that knowing your worth is the greatest armor you can wear. You do not have to scream your success from the rooftops when the ink on your contracts speaks for itself. Let them mock you. Let them overlook you. Let them think they have the upper hand. You just keep moving in absolute silence. And when the time is right, you let your success be the loudest, most devastating sound in the room. The memory of how we reached that explosive night at the charity auction starts exactly 6 months earlier. We were at Jamal and Chloe's sprawling suburban house for one of their mandatory Sunday dinners. The air in their massive dining room was thick with the smell of roasted lamb and unearned arrogance. Jamal is Trevon's older brother, a man who shares the same inflated ego, but lacks the superficial charm Trevon uses to pull it off. They both worked in finance, constantly competing in a silent war of luxury cars and tailored suits. Chloe, Jamal's white wife, sat across from me, wearing a smile that never quite reached her cold blue eyes. She was wearing a pristine tennis outfit she had absolutely not played tennis in, just to look the part of the wealthy suburban housewife she so desperately wanted to be. Trevon sat at the head of the table, swirling an expensive glass of bourbon that he definitely put on a credit card he could not afford to pay off. He was loudly mocking what he called my little at-home data entry gig to anyone who would listen, shifting the conversation to boast about his impending promotion to senior vice president. He told the table how I spent my days clicking on mindless spreadsheets while he was out swimming with the sharks. Jamal laughed along a harsh grating sound while slicing his meat. When dinner finally ended, Chloe stood up and handed me a heavy stack of dirty dessert plates with a deeply condescending smirk. "It is so brave of you to just be comfortable with doing nothing all day, Kendra," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness as she patted my shoulder. "You know Trevon works so hard to provide. It must be nice to just relax in your pajamas while the men handle the real pressure." I did not argue with her. I did not throw the china plates at the wall, even though the urge was certainly there. I just smiled tightly and carried the dishes to the sink. I stood at her marble island, washing her expensive plates, letting the warm water run over my hands to calm my nerves. I knew exactly who I was and what I was worth. I let them enjoy their collective delusion, because right at that moment, my phone buzzed in my pocket with a secure notification. It was a financial alert that was about to change my entire life. The very next morning, the disrespect escalated from annoying to actively destructive. I was at the local grocery store, standing at the checkout register with a cart full of weekly supplies. I swiped our joint debit card. The machine beeped a harsh red and said declined. I frowned and tried again, assuming it was a chip error. Declined. Panic flared in my chest for a fraction of a second before I stepped aside, apologizing to the cashier, and checked my banking app on my phone. The joint account was completely empty. Trevon had drained every single dollar overnight. A moment later, a text message popped up on my screen from him. It said he had to buy a Rolex to look the part for the senior partners at his firm, and that I needed to figure out the groceries on my own. He actually typed the words, "Success costs money." He left his wife stranded at a cash register with no money for food so he could impress men who did not even respect him. I did not cry. I did not panic. I simply reached into the hidden zippered pocket of my wallet and pulled out a sleek, heavy black metal card. The cashier looked at me with a mix of impatience and pity, assuming I was some broke housewife scrambling for pennies. She had no idea she was looking at the sole architect and founder of Nova Analytics. Trevon thought I did data entry. Jamal and Chloe thought I watched daytime television. None of them knew I had spent the last 3 years locked in my home office building an entire technological ecosystem from scratch. I wrote the code myself, creating a predictive financial algorithm capable of analyzing market volatility faster than any human trader, and it was currently revolutionizing the private sector. I paid for my groceries with a single tap of my metal card and walked out to the parking lot. As I loaded the bags into the trunk of my car, my phone rang. It was David, my lead developer, and one of the few people who actually knew my identity. He sounded breathless. He told me he had just intercepted a massive data packet regarding an impending corporate bankruptcy in the financial sector. The firm Trevon worked for was going under. They had over-leveraged themselves on terrible investments and were desperately begging for a buyout from a parent company to save their executives from total financial ruin. I gripped the steering wheel of my car, letting the information sink in. The parent company Trevon's firm was begging for salvation from was Apex Solutions, the very same Apex Solutions that had been aggressively courting Nova Analytics for a massive acquisition over the past month. I sat in my car and laughed out loud at the absolute poetry of the situation. Trevon's professional survival, his impending promotion, his entire fragile ego was completely dependent on the mercy of a company that was about to make me a multimillionaire. He was out buying luxury watches to impress bosses who were secretly drowning in debt. I decided right then and there that it was time to stop hiding in the shadows. I sent a secure message to my team, telling them to schedule a face-to-face meeting with Xavier, the Chief Executive Officer of Apex Solutions. It was time to close my deal and secure my crown. The following Tuesday, I walked into the sleek high-rise downtown offices of Apex Solutions. I left my comfortable work-from-home clothes behind and wore a sharp, tailored crimson power suit with heels that clicked aggressively against the polished marble floors. I did not look like the useless wife Trevon loved to mock. I looked like a woman who owned the building. I was escorted into a massive glass-walled conference room where Xavier was waiting. Xavier was a legend in the tech and finance worlds, brilliant, ruthless, and entirely focused on results. As a highly successful African-American man who had built his own empire from nothing, he looked at my code, my system architecture, and my business model with absolute respect. There was zero condescension in his eyes, only the immediate recognition of an equal. We spent 3 hours hammering out the details of the acquisition. I did not back down on a single term. We finalized the paperwork with a firm handshake. Apex Solutions was officially acquiring Nova Analytics for a massive 8-figure payout. But I was not just walking away with cash. I demanded and retained creative control over the algorithm, a permanent seat on the Apex board of directors, and majority shareholder rights in several of their newly acquired subsidiaries. That included the failing financial firm where my arrogant husband was currently employed. Xavier poured 2 glasses of expensive scotch and offered a toast to my new empire and our future partnership. I drank the scotch, feeling the fire burn down my throat, a perfect reflection of the power I now held. But when I drove home that evening, the high of my corporate victory came crashing back down into the reality of my toxic marriage. I walked through the front door and heard the shower running upstairs. Trevon's leather overnight bag was thrown carelessly on the bed, half-packed. I walked over to his suit jacket draped over a chair to move it, and a small piece of paper fluttered to the floor. It was a receipt from a high-end jeweler downtown. $2,000 for a pair of diamond drop earrings. I looked at my reflection in the mirror, knowing perfectly well those earrings were not meant for me. I had not received jewelry from Trevon in 3 years. As I stood there, his phone lit up on the nightstand with a new text message. The name on the screen read Jasmine. She was a junior analyst at his firm, who I had met briefly at a holiday party last year. The message read that she could not wait for their weekend getaway and called him baby. A wave of cold realization washed over me. Trevon had not just drained our joint account for a watch. He had been actively funding his affair with the money he swore was strictly for professional networking. He was using the money we had saved together to buy diamonds for a 24-year-old girl, while telling me to figure out the grocery bill. A younger, weaker version of me might have screamed. I might have confronted him right there when he stepped out of the shower, demanding answers and crying tears of betrayal. But I was no longer that woman. I was a board member of Apex Solutions. I slipped the jewelry receipt right back into the pocket of his jacket, exactly where I found it. I wiped my face completely clean of any emotion. I decided not to give him the satisfaction of my tears or the warning of my anger. I had a much grander stage in mind for his complete and utter destruction. Trevon returned from his so-called business retreat on Sunday evening, smelling like expensive cologne and lies. He dropped his bags by the door and immediately demanded that I accompany him to his firm's upcoming annual charity gala. He paced around the kitchen, telling me how critical this event was. He needed to play the devoted family man because Xavier, the CEO of Apex Solutions, was going to be in attendance. Trevon practically sweated as he explained that his entire promotion and the survival of the firm depended heavily on impressing Xavier. He tossed a plastic shopping bag onto the kitchen island. Inside was a cheap clearance rack dress he had clearly picked up at a discount department store on his way home. He looked me up and down with absolute disdain and told me to wear it to just stand there, look pretty, and not embarrass him in front of the people who actually mattered. I pulled the scratchy fabric out of the plastic bag. I looked at the uneven stitching and the dull color. Trevon walked out of the kitchen, grabbing a beer from the fridge, as if he had not just insulted my entire existence. I did not throw the dress at him. I simply pulled out my phone, opened my encrypted messaging app, and texted Xavier a single word: tonight. The trap was officially set, and I was ready to watch Trevon walk blindly right into it. The morning sun was bright, but my mood was purely calculating. I stood at the checkout lane of the upscale organic grocery store we frequented with my cart loaded with fresh produce and premium cuts of meat that Trevon demanded for his strict dietary routine. The cashier scanned the last item and announced the total of $284. I pulled out the joint debit card Trevon and I shared for household expenses and slid it into the machine. The terminal processed for a moment before letting out a sharp, flat beep to indicate it was declined. I stared at the red letters flashing on the screen. The young cashier sighed heavily and shifted her weight from one foot to the other while offering me a look of thinly veiled judgment. I tried the card a second time, assuming it was a simple network error. The machine beeped again with another declined message. Panic is a luxury for people who do not have a plan. I simply stepped out of line, politely asked the cashier for a brief moment, and pulled out my phone to check my banking app. I logged into the joint account and saw that the balance was exactly zero. The numbers stared back at me as a glaring testament to my husband's financial recklessness. Trevon had drained every single dollar overnight. Before I could even process the audacity of his actions, a text message popped up on my screen. It was from Trevon. The message read that he had to buy a new Rolex to look the part for the senior partners at his firm. He told me to figure out the groceries on my own. He actually typed the words saying, "Success costs money." He had left his wife stranded at a cash register with absolutely no money for food, just so he could strap a piece of jewelry to his wrist and impress men who did not even respect him. Trevon was a master of constructing a hollow facade of wealth, while the foundation of his reality crumbled underneath him. He expected me to cry. He expected me to call him begging for a solution or panicking about how I would feed us. I did not cry and I did not panic. I simply closed the text message and slid my phone back into my pocket. I walked back to the register and smiled at the cashier. I reached into the hidden zippered compartment of my wallet and pulled out a sleek, heavy black metal card. It was not a card tied to Trevon. It was not a card tied to any domestic life he knew about. I dropped the heavy metal card onto the counter. It landed with a solid, authoritative thud that made the cashier blink in surprise. I paid for my groceries effortlessly and walked away. Trevon genuinely thought I did basic data entry for a mid-level marketing agency. Jamal and Chloe thought I spent my days watching daytime television and folding laundry. None of them had the slightest idea that I was the sole architect and founder of Nova Analytics. I had spent the last 3 years locked in my home office, building an entire technological ecosystem from scratch. While Trevon was out drinking expensive bourbon he could not afford, I was writing thousands of lines of code in absolute silence. I built the platform using Kotlin and implemented a flawless MVVM architecture to ensure the application was scalable and completely secure. I integrated all of it on a robust Firebase backend that processed real-time data without a single millisecond of lag. Nova Analytics was not just a spreadsheet or a basic tracking tool. It was a highly advanced predictive financial algorithm capable of analyzing market volatility, flagging corporate debt structures, and predicting financial collapse faster than any human trader on Wall Street. It was currently revolutionizing the private financial sector, and I owned every single line of that intellectual property. I was not a useless wife. I was a self-made millionaire moving steadily toward an empire. I pushed my shopping cart out into the bright parking lot as the crisp morning air cleared my head. As I loaded the heavy grocery bags into the trunk of my car, my private business phone rang. It was David, my lead developer, and one of the very few people who actually knew my real identity. I answered the call, and his voice came through the speaker sounding completely breathless. He told me he had just intercepted and analyzed a massive data packet regarding an impending corporate bankruptcy in the financial sector. He read the numbers to me out loud, and a cold wave of realization washed over me. The firm Trevon worked for was going under. David explained that the firm had over-leveraged themselves on terrible investments, and they were bleeding capital at an unsustainable rate. They were officially bankrupt on paper, and their executives were scrambling in the dark. They were desperately begging for a buyout from a parent company to save themselves from total financial ruin and public humiliation. David's voice crackled through the car speakers as I sat in the driver's seat. He was talking fast, rattling off the financial data he had just pulled from the secure server. He explained that Sterling Capital, the elite financial management firm where my husband paraded around as a self-proclaimed king, was hemorrhaging money at a catastrophic rate. They had over-leveraged themselves on a series of disastrous commercial real estate investments and failed tech startups. They were officially underwater. David told me the executives were running around like headless chickens trying to secure a discreet bailout before the quarterly reports went public and the SEC started asking uncomfortable questions. I listened to the numbers, my mind automatically organizing the data points. Trevon was out draining my grocery money to buy a luxury watch, projecting the image of a wildly successful senior executive, while the ground beneath his tailored Italian leather shoes was completely collapsing. He was literally polishing the brass on a sinking ship. He had convinced himself that superficial displays of wealth could somehow manifest actual corporate stability. I asked David who they were begging for a bailout. When he said the name, the entire world seemed to stop spinning for a fraction of a second before snapping back into perfect, crystal-clear focus. Apex Solutions. David repeated the name entirely unaware of the cosmic joke playing out in my life. Apex Solutions was the largest venture capital and technology acquisition conglomerate on the West Coast. They were known for swooping in, buying out failing financial firms for pennies on the dollar, and stripping them down to the studs. But that was not why the name made my heart hammer against my ribs. Apex Solutions was the exact same company that had been aggressively courting Nova Analytics for the past 4 months. Their chief executive officer, a notoriously brilliant and notoriously private billionaire named Xavier, had been personally sending secure emails to my encrypted developer account. He had been trying to uncover the true identity of the architect behind Nova Analytics for half a year. He knew my algorithm was outperforming every single predictive model on the market, and he was absolutely desperate to acquire it before his competitors caught wind of what I had built. I had kept him at arm's length, negotiating anonymously behind firewalls and proxy servers, waiting for the valuation of my company to reach its absolute peak. The sheer poetry of the situation washed over me. It was almost too perfect to be real. Trevon's professional survival, his impending promotion, his fragile, arrogant ego, and his entire fake lifestyle were completely dependent on the mercy of a company that was currently preparing to write me a check with 8 zeros on it. Trevon was praying for salvation from the very man who was practically begging to do business with me. Trevon and his brother Jamal built their entire identities around their corporate titles, mocking my quiet existence at home while I was silently holding the keys to the kingdom they were trying so desperately to conquer. I thanked David for the information, told him to keep monitoring the server, and ended the call. I sat in my car for a long time watching the afternoon sun reflect off the hood. For 5 years I had shrunk myself to fit into Trevon's narrative. I played the quiet, supportive wife. I wore the modest clothes. I let his family disrespect me at dinner parties while Chloe handed me her dirty dishes. I allowed him to treat my brilliant technological empire as if it were a silly little hobby that kept me busy while he did the real work. I had done all of it to keep the peace in a marriage that he was actively destroying with his greed and his pride. I drove home and meticulously put the groceries away. I prepped the expensive cuts of meat, chopped the organic vegetables, and poured myself a glass of sparkling water. I was sitting at the kitchen island running a system diagnostic on my laptop when the front door opened. Trevon walked in. He was practically buzzing with unearned arrogance. He dropped his briefcase on the floor and shrugged off his suit jacket. He walked straight over to me and extended his left arm, pulling back his cuff to reveal a heavy, gleaming gold Rolex. He did not apologize for draining our bank account. He did not ask how I managed to pay for the food cooking on the stove. He just tapped the face of the watch and smiled a painfully oblivious smile. He told me the senior partners had noticed the watch immediately. He boasted that projecting wealth was the only way to attract wealth. He actually had the audacity to lean against the counter, look at my laptop screen filled with complex code he could not comprehend, and tell me that if I applied myself more, I might actually make a few extra bucks to contribute to the household. He said Jamal and Chloe were right about me needing to step out of my comfort zone. I looked at the gold watch. I looked at his smug face. I thought about the massive debt his firm was hiding and the imminent collapse of his entire career. I did not scream. I did not throw my glass of water in his face. I did not mention the empty bank account or the black metal card sitting in my wallet. I just looked at him and smiled. I told him the watch looked exactly like something a man in his position should wear. I fed his delusion with a silver spoon. He puffed out his chest, completely blind to the double meaning of my words, and walked upstairs to change his clothes. Watching him walk away, I realized that living in the shadows was no longer serving me. Protecting his fragile masculinity had only empowered him to disrespect me. I had built a masterpiece of technological engineering, and it was time to claim my absolute worth in the broad daylight. I was not going to negotiate through proxy servers anymore. I was not going to be the invisible architect while my husband auctioned off my dignity to his peers. I opened my encrypted email client and pulled up the most recent acquisition offer from Apex Solutions. I deleted the polite, evasive response I had drafted earlier that morning. Instead, I typed out a direct, uncompromising message to Xavier's private executive assistant. I stated that the anonymous founder of Nova Analytics was finally ready to discuss the acquisition terms in person. I demanded a private face-to-face meeting with Xavier at the Apex Solutions headquarters for the following Tuesday. I laid out my preliminary conditions and made it clear that my time was extremely valuable. I hit send and watched the confirmation pop up on the screen. A profound sense of calm settled over my entire body. The days of playing the useless wife were officially over. I was about to walk into the boardroom of the most powerful tech conglomerate in the city, look a billionaire in the eye, and secure my crown. And when the dust finally settled, I was going to ensure that Trevon and his entire toxic family were left standing in the ruins of the empire I was about to buy. The following Tuesday morning, I woke up before the sun even considered rising over the city skyline. I stood in the center of my massive walk-in closet and bypassed the muted pastel sweaters and comfortable yoga pants that Trevon preferred me to wear. Those clothes belonged to a woman who no longer existed. Instead, I reached for a meticulously tailored emerald green power suit that I had purchased secretly months ago. The cut was sharp, unapologetic, and commanded immediate attention. I paired it with sleek black stiletto heels that sounded like a ticking clock against the hardwood floors of my bedroom. I pulled my hair back into a flawless, severe bun and applied a dark, bold shade of lipstick. I looked into the full-length mirror and saw exactly what I had been hiding for the past 5 years. I did not look like a submissive housewife who spent her days burning toast and waiting for her husband to validate her existence. I looked like a corporate titan preparing to go to war. I drove my car into the heart of the downtown financial district, pulling into the private underground parking garage of the Apex Solutions headquarters. The building was a towering monolith of glass and black steel that dominated the city skyline. It was the exact building Trevon looked at with absolute reverence every time we drove past it. He viewed Apex as Mount Olympus, a place where only the most elite financial gods were allowed to operate. He had absolutely no idea that his wife was about to walk through the front doors and buy a permanent seat at the highest table. I stepped onto the executive elevator and swiped the temporary clearance badge Xavier's assistant had sent to my secure phone. The glass elevator shot up to the 60th floor, my ears popping slightly as I ascended far above the chaotic traffic of the city. The doors slid open to reveal a sprawling reception area decorated in minimalist black marble and brushed silver. The executive assistant, a sharp-looking woman with a tablet, stood up immediately and greeted me by my first name. She led me down a long, quiet corridor lined with massive glass-walled conference rooms. I could see teams of executives in tailored suits frantically analyzing market trends and pointing to digital whiteboards. These were the sharks Trevon constantly talked about, and I was walking right past them to meet the apex predator himself. The assistant opened the heavy oak double doors at the end of the hallway and stepped aside. I walked into a corner office that offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the entire city. Standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows was Xavier. He was a towering, impeccably dressed African-American man in his late 40s, exuding the kind of quiet, absolute power that only comes from building an empire from the ground up. He turned around as I entered, and his piercing dark eyes locked onto mine. For a moment, we just looked at each other, acknowledging the mutual weight of the moment. There was no underestimation in his gaze. There was no condescending smile or patronizing tone. He did not see a woman playing with computers. He saw the genius architect who had built an algorithm that was currently outperforming every single predictive model his multi-billion-dollar company possessed. Xavier crossed the room and extended his hand. His handshake was firm and completely respectful. He invited me to sit at the massive marble conference table in the center of his office. We did not waste time with superficial small talk. We were both predators who respected efficiency. I opened my briefcase, pulled out my encrypted laptop, and brought up the core architecture of Nova Analytics. For the next 2 hours, we dove deep into the technical brilliance of my creation. I walked him through the Kotlin codebase, explaining exactly how my MVVM architecture allowed the predictive models to scale infinitely without crashing the Firebase backend. I showed him how the algorithm ingested real-time global market data, identified microscopic patterns of financial volatility, and flagged toxic corporate debt structures before human analysts could even open a spreadsheet. Xavier leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers, completely captivated by the presentation. He told me that my platform was not just an application, but a functional revolution. He admitted that Apex Solutions needed Nova Analytics to secure their dominance in the upcoming fiscal decade. He did not try to lowball me. He did not try to mansplain my own technology to me. He treated me as an absolute equal, and because of that respect, I was ready to negotiate the final terms of my surrender to the Apex umbrella. Xavier slid a thick leather-bound folder across the marble table. It was the formal acquisition contract. He offered a massive 8-figure cash payout that would be transferred directly into my private offshore accounts by the end of the business day. But the cash was only the beginning of my demands. I looked Xavier dead in the eye and laid out my non-negotiable conditions. I told him I would surrender the proprietary rights to the algorithm, but I demanded a permanent voting seat on the Apex Solutions Board of Directors. I also required total creative control over the future updates to the Nova Analytics software. Then I leaned forward and dropped my final, most crucial demand. I knew Apex Solutions was currently in the process of acquiring dozens of failing financial firms, scooping them up for pennies on the dollar to expand their corporate portfolio. I told Xavier that in addition to the cash and the board seat, I wanted majority shareholder rights and total executive control over one specific subsidiary. I pushed a single piece of paper across the table with the name Sterling Capital printed in bold black ink. Xavier looked at the paper, then looked back at me, a slow, knowing smile spreading across his face. He did not ask why I wanted a hemorrhaging, over-leveraged, second-tier financial management firm. He simply recognized a ruthless strategic maneuver when he saw one. He nodded his head, pulled a gold fountain pen from his breast pocket, and signed his name at the bottom of the master contract. He handed the pen to me. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the gold instrument in my hand. With a few swift strokes, I signed the documents, officially transferring Nova Analytics to Apex Solutions and securing my status as a multimillionaire corporate powerhouse and the absolute owner of my husband's career. Xavier stood up, walked over to a crystal decanter on a side table, and poured 2 generous glasses of an incredibly rare aged scotch. He handed one to me and raised his glass in the air. He offered a toast to my new empire, to moving in silence, and to the absolute destruction of anyone who underestimated the architect. We clinked our glasses together. The heavy crystal chimed like a victory bell in the quiet office. I drank the scotch, letting the rich, smoky burn travel down my throat. It tasted like freedom, it tasted like power. I left the Apex building feeling like I was walking on air. The emerald green suit felt like armor, and the black metal card in my wallet was now backed by an unimaginable fortune. I drove back to the suburbs, the city skyline shrinking in my rearview mirror, as I returned to the quiet, manicured streets of my domestic life. I pulled into the driveway, mentally preparing to switch gears back into the role of the quiet, unassuming wife for just a little while longer. I unlocked the front door, the lingering high of my corporate victory still humming in my veins. But the moment I stepped into the foyer, reality came crashing back down into my living room in the form of a deeply familiar betrayal. The heavy oak front door clicked shut behind me, sealing me back inside the pristine suburban illusion I had maintained for the last 5 years. I slipped off my black stiletto heels, letting my bare feet sink into the plush entryway rug. The house was usually perfectly quiet at this hour, a silent monument to our supposed domestic success. But today, there was a frantic, chaotic energy vibrating down the hallway. I could hear the heavy thud of footsteps and the aggressive slamming of closet doors coming from the master bedroom upstairs. I walked up the winding staircase, my hand trailing along the polished mahogany banister, wondering exactly what new crisis my husband was in the middle of fabricating. I found Trevon tearing through his massive walk-in closet. His expensive leather weekender bag was thrown carelessly across our neatly made bed. He was tossing tailored linen shirts and silk ties into the bag with an aggressive, frantic energy. He barely looked at me when I stepped into the room. He just kept packing, waving a hand in my general direction as if I were a mild inconvenience. He immediately launched into a heavily rehearsed monologue about a mandatory last-minute executive leadership retreat. He claimed the senior partners had called an emergency weekend strategy session at a private lodge upstate to navigate the firm's turbulent financial quarter. He spoke with that breathless, self-important tone he always used when he wanted me to believe his presence was absolutely vital to the global economy. I stood in the doorway, my hands folded perfectly in front of me, listening to a man who was utterly bankrupt try to convince me he was holding up the sky. He zipped up his leather bag, grabbed his designer toiletry kit, and announced he needed a quick shower before hitting the road to beat the evening traffic. He disappeared into the master bathroom, and seconds later the heavy sound of rushing water echoed through the suite. I walked over to the bed to smooth out the duvet he had ruined. His tailored suit jacket was draped haphazardly over the velvet armchair in the corner. I reached out to hang it up in the closet, an instinctive habit born from years of playing the dutiful, accommodating wife. But as my fingers brushed against the fine wool fabric, I felt the distinct sharp crinkle of thick paper hidden deep inside the inner breast pocket. I stopped. A strange, cold intuition washed over my entire body. I reached into the silk-lined pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of thick cardstock. I opened it slowly. It was a purchase receipt from one of the most exclusive high-end jewelers in the downtown Diamond District. My eyes scanned the black ink. The date printed at the top was from yesterday afternoon, right around the exact same time I was standing at the grocery store staring at a declined debit card. The item description was clear and unmistakable. 2-carat flawless teardrop diamond earrings. The total price printed at the bottom was staggering. I stared at the numbers, letting the reality of the paper burn itself into my brain. Those diamonds had never made it into my jewelry box. I had not received a single piece of jewelry from Trevon in over 3 years. He had repeatedly told me we needed to be financially disciplined, that every spare dollar needed to go toward his networking budget and maintaining the lifestyle necessary for his upcoming promotion. As I stood there holding the receipt, the room grew incredibly still. The only sound was the shower running behind the closed bathroom door. Then a sudden sharp vibration shattered the quiet. Trevon's phone lit up on the dark wood of his nightstand. I walked over, my bare feet completely silent on the carpet. I looked down at the glowing screen. A text message preview was displayed bright and clear. The sender's name was Jasmine. I remembered her instantly. She was a 24-year-old junior analyst at his firm. I had met her briefly at a corporate holiday party last winter. She had looked at Trevon with wide, naive eyes, completely blinded by his fake prestige and tailored suits. The text message on the screen left absolutely nothing to the imagination. It read that she could not wait for their romantic weekend away, and she called him baby. A profound, freezing wave of clarity crashed over my entire body. Trevon had not just drained our joint account to buy a luxury watch to impress his bosses. The watch was only a fraction of his deception. He had been systematically siphoning off the funds we had built together, money he swore was strictly allocated for client networking and corporate survival, to fund a lavish secret affair with a girl 10 years his junior. He was using the money I helped save to buy diamonds for his mistress, all while leaving me stranded at a grocery store checkout line with $0 to my name. He was financing his infidelity with my stability. He was building a second life on the back of my quiet sacrifices. A younger, weaker version of me might have shattered right there in the bedroom. A woman who did not know her own power would have marched into that bathroom, thrown open the glass shower door, and screamed at the top of her lungs. I could have thrown the receipt in his wet face. I could have demanded answers, cried tears of profound betrayal, and begged to know why I was not enough for him. I could have given him the ultimate satisfaction of witnessing my devastation. It would have fed his massive ego to know he held the power to destroy my emotional state. But I was not that woman anymore. I was a board member of Apex Solutions. I was a self-made multi-million-dollar powerhouse who had just conquered the very industry he was currently drowning in. I did not need to scream to prove my power. I carefully folded the heavy cardstock receipt along its original creases. I walked back over to the velvet armchair and slipped the paper right back into the inner breast pocket of his suit jacket, ensuring it rested exactly where I had found it. I stepped away from the nightstand, leaving his phone face up, the glowing message fading slowly into the dark. I wiped my face completely clean of any emotion, smoothing my features into a mask of total, serene indifference. I had a much grander stage in mind for his complete and utter destruction. When Trevon finally emerged from the bathroom, smelling like expensive cologne and deceit, I smiled warmly and told him to have a wonderful, productive weekend. I watched him walk out the front door, knowing he was stepping closer and closer to the edge of an absolute cliff. The weekend passed in absolute blissful silence. With Trevon out of town entertaining his junior analyst on my dime, I had the sprawling suburban house entirely to myself. I did not spend a single second crying into my pillow or wondering where my marriage went wrong. Instead, I set up a command center on the large marble kitchen island. I poured myself a glass of vintage red wine, opened my encrypted laptop, and spent the next 48 hours executing a flawless corporate takeover from my pajamas. Xavier and his legal team at Apex Solutions had granted me full executive access to the internal financial servers of Sterling Capital. As the new majority shareholder of their failing subsidiary, I had the right to audit their books. What I found was completely pathetic. Trevon's specific department was bleeding capital at a staggering rate. His expense accounts were bloated with fraudulent charges, fake client dinners, and weekend getaways that had absolutely nothing to do with corporate strategy. His brother Jamal was doing even worse, mismanaging client portfolios to cover his own luxurious lifestyle. The entire firm was a house of cards waiting for a strong gust of wind. I was going to be a hurricane. Sunday evening arrived and the front door unlocked. Trevon walked in carrying his leather weekender bag. He performed a dramatic sigh, dropping his keys onto the console table and rubbing the back of his neck as if he had just spent the last 2 days carrying the weight of the global economy on his shoulders. He complained loudly about how exhausting the strategy retreat had been, how the senior partners had kept them in constant meetings, and how much pressure he was under to save the firm. I stood in the kitchen holding a glass of sparkling water, smelling the faint, lingering scent of expensive floral perfume clinging to his shirt collar. It was not a brand I wore. I just offered him a sympathetic smile and agreed that he worked far too hard. He ignored the water I offered and immediately paced around the kitchen island, his arrogant energy ramping back up. He told me he needed my full cooperation for the upcoming Friday night. Sterling Capital was hosting its prestigious annual charity gala at the St. Regis Hotel downtown. It was the most important social event of their corporate calendar, but this year it carried massive life-or-death stakes. Trevon's eyes widened with manic ambition as he explained that Xavier, the notoriously elusive billionaire chief executive officer of Apex Solutions, had officially RSVP'd to the event. The entire executive board of Sterling Capital was practically salivating. They knew Apex was looking to acquire failing firms, and Trevon was absolutely convinced that if he could corner Xavier at the gala and charm him, he would not only save his own job, but secure his highly coveted promotion to senior vice president. Trevon leaned against the counter and told me he needed to project the absolute perfect image of a stable, reliable family man. He said corporate billionaires like Xavier valued traditional optics. He needed his quiet, obedient wife standing right by his side to complete the illusion. Then he reached down and picked up a flimsy plastic shopping bag he had brought in with his luggage. It was not a garment bag from a high-end boutique. It was a crinkled plastic bag from a notoriously cheap discount department store. He reached inside and pulled out a dress. He tossed it onto the marble island. It slid across the smooth surface and stopped right in front of my hands. I looked down at the garment. It was a dull, uninspired shade of beige with uneven stitching and rough, cheap fabric. It was the kind of dress designed to make a woman blend into the wallpaper and completely disappear. Trevon looked me up and down with an expression of sheer condescension. He told me that funds were a little tight right now because he had to invest so heavily in his networking budget. He said he did not have the cash for me to go shopping at my usual stores, completely ignoring the fact that he had just spent $2,000 on diamond drop earrings for his 24-year-old mistress. He pointed at the cheap fabric and told me to wear it. He laid out his strict ground rules for the gala. He told me to stand quietly by his side, look pleasant, and speak only when spoken to. He explicitly commanded me not to talk about my little data entry job because the men in attendance were dealing with high-level financial concepts that I could not possibly comprehend. He looked me dead in the eye and told me to just look pretty, and whatever I did, do not embarrass him in front of the people who actually mattered. He scoffed, grabbed a beer from the refrigerator, and walked upstairs to unpack his deceitful weekend bag, completely satisfied with his own perceived dominance. I stood alone in the kitchen looking down at the clearance rack dress. I reached out and ran my fingers over the scratchy synthetic material. I thought about the flawless 2-carat diamonds currently sitting on Jasmine's ears. I thought about the 8-figure buyout sitting in my secure offshore accounts. I thought about the absolute irony of a man who was mathematically bankrupt commanding the billionaire who owned his entire career to wear a discount dress and stay quiet. I did not throw the dress in the trash. I left it right there on the counter. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and pulled out my secure phone. I opened my direct encrypted messaging line to Xavier. I did not type out a long explanation of my husband's audacity. I did not ask for permission to execute my plan. I simply typed a single word: tonight. I hit send and watched the delivery confirmation glow on the screen. The trap was officially set. I was going to wear that cheap dress to the St. Regis. I was going to stand quietly by his side. And when the moment was absolutely perfect, I was going to burn his entire fake world straight to the ground. The valet line at the St. Regis was a parade of European luxury vehicles and forced smiles. I stepped out of the passenger side of Trevon's leased car, wearing the beige synthetic disaster he had thrown at me earlier that evening. The fabric was stiff against my skin. The hemline was awkwardly uneven, and the color washed out my complexion entirely. It was by all conventional standards an absolute tragedy of a garment. But as I smoothed the cheap material over my hips, I felt more powerful than I ever had in my life. It was the perfect camouflage. I was a Trojan horse wrapped in discount polyester rolling silently past the gates of their exclusive little world. Trevon practically vibrated with nervous energy. He adjusted his silk bow tie twice before handing the keys to the valet. He grabbed my elbow, his grip a little too tight, and pulled me toward the grand revolving doors. He muttered his final instructions under his breath, reminding me to keep my head down to stay at our assigned table and to let him handle all the important conversations. He told me that tonight was about proving he belonged in the upper echelon of the financial sector. I just nodded and gave him a soft, obedient smile, holding my simple, unbranded clutch tightly in my hands. He had no idea that my clutch held a sleek black metal card and a phone loaded with the exact digital contracts that proved I already owned the entire building. We walked into the crystal room, and the sheer opulence of the space hit us like a wave. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceilings, casting a warm golden light over dozens of meticulously decorated round tables. Towering ice sculptures slowly melted near the seafood buffets, and a live string quartet played softly from a raised velvet platform. The air was thick with the scent of roasted truffles, expensive floral perfumes, and absolute desperate ambition. This was the charity gala of the year, a place where executives spent thousands of dollars on auction items, just to prove to each other that they had the liquid capital to do so. Trevon guided me through the crowd of silk gowns and tailored suits, his eyes darting frantically around the room, searching for anyone with a higher net worth than his own. He finally spotted our assigned spot at table 4. It was situated dead center in the ballroom, visible to everyone, but completely removed from the elite VIP sections. He pulled out my chair, waited for me to sit down, and then immediately turned his back on me. He told me he needed to go network near the open bar, and that I should just drink water and stay out of the way. I watched him sprint off into the crowd, desperately chasing the validation of men who would be begging me for their jobs by tomorrow morning. I sat quietly in my cheap beige dress and simply watched the room operate. From my vantage point at table 4, I had a perfect, unobstructed view of the entire corporate ecosystem. I saw the fake handshakes, the forced laughter, and the subtle calculations happening behind every single interaction. These people believed they were the untouchable masters of the universe, entirely secure in their wealth and social standing. 10 minutes later, the grand double doors of the ballroom swung open again and my brother-in-law Jamal walked in with his wife Chloe. I watched them navigate the entryway, and the contrast between the two of them was glaringly obvious. Jamal looked absolutely terrible. He was sweating heavily through the collar of his expensive tuxedo, his skin possessing a sickly grayish undertone. He kept wiping his forehead with a cloth handkerchief and looking over his shoulder like he expected a collection agency to walk through the door at any moment. His specific division of the financial firm was hemorrhaging money at an unsustainable rate, and unlike Trevon Jamal, was smart enough to know that the walls were rapidly closing in. He looked like a man walking to the gallows, fully aware that his career was on life support. Chloe, however, was completely and blissfully oblivious to their impending financial ruin. She strutted into the ballroom like she had personally funded the entire event. She was wearing a blindingly bright white designer gown that hugged her frame, dripping in heavy diamond necklaces and tennis bracelets that Jamal had likely financed with a second mortgage he could not afford. She posed for the event photographers at the entrance, throwing her head back in manufactured laughter, desperate to ensure everyone in the room noticed her arrival. She radiated the kind of hollow, toxic entitlement that only comes from a lifetime of never being held accountable for anything. Jamal whispered something frantic in her ear, shook his head, and quickly abandoned her to go find Trevon near the executive bar. Chloe did not seem to mind his departure at all. She simply turned her attention to the ballroom floor, her cold blue eyes scanning the crowd for an audience. She needed someone to dominate. She needed someone she could easily belittle to validate her own fragile sense of superiority. It did not take long for her gaze to sweep past the ice sculptures and land directly on table 4. Her eyes locked onto me sitting completely alone in my dull clearance rack dress. Even from across the massive room, I could see her face light up with a deeply malicious joy. I was the perfect target. I was the quiet, submissive, useless wife who never fought back and never caused a scene. Chloe flagged down a passing waiter and grabbed a glass of dark red wine from his silver tray. I watched her perfectly manicured fingers wrap around the crystal stem. She did not take a sip. Instead, she adjusted her posture, plastered a predatory smile onto her face, and began her deliberate march across the ballroom floor. She navigated through the sea of wealthy guests with singular focus, her eyes fixed entirely on the cheap beige hemline of my dress. She was coming right for me, armed and ready to draw blood, completely unaware that she was walking barefoot straight into a minefield. Chloe's obnoxious manufactured laughter fades into the ambient noise of the ballroom as she struts back toward the open bar, thoroughly satisfied with her petty little performance. I sit perfectly still, the damp spot of cheap white wine cooling against my knee. Before I can even set my linen napkin down, the scent of a sickly sweet, overly expensive floral perfume announces my next visitor. It is the exact same perfume that lingered on Trevon's shirt collar after his supposed weekend business retreat. I look up to see a young woman sliding into the empty chair directly beside me. She is 24 years old, wearing a sleek crimson gown with a plunging neckline that definitely costs more than her entry-level salary could ever afford. But what truly catches the light of the crystal chandeliers are the earrings. They are 2-carat flawless teardrop diamonds dangling from her earlobes. I recognize them instantly. They are the grocery money diamonds. They are the manifestation of every dollar Trevon drained from our joint savings account. This is Jasmine. She crosses her legs, leans in entirely too close, and offers me a look of deep, patronizing pity as she eyes the wet wine stain on my cheap polyester dress. She introduces herself with a painfully fake sweetness, playing the role of the innocent junior analyst who just wanted to come say hello to her boss's wife. She tells me how much everyone at the firm admires Trevon, how hard he works, and how he is just such an incredible mentor to her. I do not flinch. I do not break my posture. I just look at her and smile, a polite, hollow smile, letting her spin her web. Jasmine is not here to be friendly. She is here to mark her territory. She wants to look the oblivious wife in the eye and revel in her own secret victory. She leans in a little closer, lowering her voice, as if we are sharing a private joke. She says it must be so stressful packing up the house right now. I keep my expression completely blank and ask her what she means. She does a theatrical little gasp, covering her mouth with her manicured hand, her diamond earrings catching the light as she shakes her head. She says she is so sorry, and that she thought I knew about the luxury downtown condo Trevon just signed a lease for. She tells me he has been bragging to the entire office about how he is upgrading his lifestyle next month to match his new promotion. She is testing the waters, trying to see exactly how blind and stupid I truly am. She expects me to crumble. She expects my face to fall, my eyes to well up with tears, or my voice to shake as I realize my marriage is a complete lie. She wants me to run across the ballroom and cause a hysterical scene so Trevon can finally justify leaving his crazy, unstable wife. I do not give her a single ounce of satisfaction. I remain icy, elegantly poised, and utterly composed. I tell her how wonderful it is that Trevon is sharing his ambitious real estate dreams with the junior staff. I reach out and gently tap the edge of her sparkling earring, telling her they are absolutely stunning. I tell her they look exactly like the kind of investment a man makes when he is desperately trying to compensate for a massive deficit. Jasmine smirks, taking my comment as a compliment about his immense wealth. She is completely unaware that I am talking about his absolute moral and financial bankruptcy. She is sitting here gloating, banking her entire youth and future on a man whose pockets are completely empty. She is chasing a ghost who is currently drowning in corporate debt, and she has no idea that the woman she is trying to humiliate actually owns the deed to her entire career. I tell her to enjoy the evening, because nights filled with this kind of luxurious illusion are incredibly rare, and they vanish much faster than people expect. Jasmine gives me one last pitying look, stands up and glides away to catch Trevon's eye across the crowded room, utterly convinced that she has won the war. I turn my attention back to the ballroom floor. Trevon is currently holding court near the executive bar, heavily intoxicated by his own perceived dominance and 3 glasses of premium scotch. He is laughing too loud, clapping senior partners on the back, and desperately scanning the room for validation. His eyes keep darting toward the VIP alcove where Xavier, the billionaire CEO of Apex Solutions, has just arrived and taken a seat. Trevon is sweating through his tailored suit, practically vibrating with the need to prove he is the ultimate alpha male in the room. He knows his promotion and his firm's survival depend entirely on getting Xavier's attention tonight. The charity auction officially begins. A hired professional auctioneer takes the stage running through a list of donated items. They auction off a week in a private villa in Cabo, a signed sports jersey, and a weekend lease for a luxury sports car. Bids are flying across the room as the executives throw their wealth around like confetti. But Trevon is not satisfied with just watching. He needs to steal the spotlight. He needs to prove his ruthless charisma to his bosses, and most importantly, to Xavier. Trevon intercepts the auctioneer and smoothly takes the microphone, stepping up to the center of the stage. The crowd cheers, fueled by alcohol and the arrogance of high society. Trevon adjusts his suit jacket, his chest puffed out, loving the heat of the spotlight. He runs through the next 2 auction items himself, making slick jokes and working the crowd into a frenzy of laughter and applause. He feels invincible. He feels like a king. Then his eyes scan the room and land directly on me. I am sitting alone at table 4 in the dead center of the ballroom, wearing the cheap beige clearance rack dress with the wet wine stain on the hem. He looks at me, and I see the cruel, malicious spark ignite in his eyes. He wants to prove to the room that he is a shark, a man so detached from sentimentality that he can turn his own life into a punchline. He raises his mahogany gavel, the heavy wood gleaming under the stage lights. He points it right at my table. He leans into the microphone, his voice booming out over the state-of-the-art sound system echoing off the crystal chandeliers. He announces the final joke item of the night. He asks the crowd of 200 elites who wants this useless wife. He broadcasts to the entire room that I work in my pajamas and burn toast. The ballroom erupts in a tidal wave of roaring laughter. Chloe snickers loudly from the next table. Jasmine smirks from the bar. Trevon looks at me with an absolutely blinding, charismatic smile, soaking in the applause, completely unaware that he has just walked blindly onto his own execution block. He grips the podium, raises the gavel higher, and asks if he hears $50. The echo of $50 hangs in the air, followed immediately by the roaring laughter of 200 wealthy executives. Chloe snickers loudly from the next table, her eyes glittering with malicious joy. Jasmine smirks from her spot by the bar, touching her diamond earrings. Trevon looks down at me with an absolutely blinding, charismatic smile, soaking in the applause, completely unaware that he has just walked blindly onto his own execution block. He grips the podium and raises the mahogany gavel higher, ready to bring it down and solidify my public humiliation. $3 million. The deep, commanding voice slices through the air, absorbing the sound of the room like a heavy velvet curtain. The laughter chokes and dies in the throats of the city's elite. The entire ballroom freezes in stunned silence. Every head turns toward the back of the room. Xavier steps forward into the brilliant light of the crystal chandeliers. He looks like a king stepping onto a battlefield, his tailored suit immaculate, his posture radiating absolute authority. He holds his bidding paddle high in the air. Trevon's smug, triumphant smile melts entirely off his face, replaced instantly by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. He recognizes Xavier immediately. This is the billionaire CEO of Apex Solutions, the man who holds the absolute fate of Sterling Capital in his hands. Trevon grips the sides of the podium so tightly his knuckles turn white. He tries desperately to salvage the moment, his voice shaking as he forces a weak, pathetic chuckle. He leans into the microphone and stammers, telling Mr. Xavier that he was just joking about the wife, that he certainly does not have to play along with the gag. Trevon's arrogance evaporates into panicked subservience in a matter of seconds. Xavier does not laugh. He does not even smile. He lowers the paddle and walks with deliberate, measured steps straight down the center aisle of the ballroom, his dark eyes locked entirely on me. He stops right in front of the stage. He looks up at Trevon with an expression of profound disgust. He speaks loudly, his voice carrying effortlessly without the need for a microphone. He states that he is not bidding on a wife. He declares that he is bidding $3 million for a single hour of my consulting time. Trevon's brain short-circuits. He looks from Xavier to me and back again, his mouth opening and closing without sound like a fish pulled out of water. Xavier turns his back on my husband and addresses the elite crowd. He tells them to pay close attention. He introduces me by name. He announces to the room that Kendra is not a useless wife, but the brilliant architect and billionaire founder of Nova Analytics. He calls me his new business partner. And then he drops the final devastating blow. He informs the executives of Sterling Capital that as of 9 o'clock this morning, I am the new majority shareholder of the very firm Trevon currently works for. The ballroom exhales a collective gasp. The sheer magnitude of the power shift sucks the oxygen right out of the room. At the table next to mine, Chloe physically recoils. Her crystal champagne glass slips through her manicured fingers and shatters violently against the marble floor. The sharp breaking of glass rings out a deeply satisfying sound of a shattered illusion. Jamal drops his fork, his jaw hitting the table as he realizes the woman he just mocked for doing data entry is now his ultimate boss. Across the room, Jasmine takes a step back, her hands flying up to touch the diamond earrings she is wearing. The blood drains from her face as she suddenly realizes she is parading around in jewelry funded by a man who is entirely broke and heavily in debt to his own wife. Trevon turns ghostly pale. Sweat begins to bead on his forehead, ruining his perfectly styled hair. He stares at me as if I am an apparition. I push my chair back and stand up slowly. I smooth my hands over the cheap beige fabric of the clearance rack dress he forced me to wear. I do not rush. I walk purposefully toward the stage, my heels clicking methodically against the floor. The sea of wealthy executives parts for me, stepping aside with a sudden profound reverence. Men and women who would not have looked twice at me 10 minutes ago are now shrinking back, completely intimidated by the sheer weight of my presence. I walk up the steps and stand right beside Trevon at the podium. I reach out and take the microphone directly from his shaking hand. I look him dead in the eye in front of his colleagues, his mistress, and the city's absolute elite. I do not yell. I do not cry. I speak with surgical precision. I ask him if he still wants to know how I am going to figure out the grocery bill. I turn to the crowd and systematically dismantle his entire ego. I expose his drained joint accounts. I detail exactly how he used corporate networking funds to buy 2-carat diamonds for a junior analyst while leaving his wife stranded at a checkout register. I watch his face crumble into absolute despair as I outline his utter incompetence at work, pulling apart his inflated metrics and exposing the massive toxic debts his division has been hiding from the board. I tell the silent room that a man who cannot even balance his own household budget has absolutely no business handling billions of dollars in client capital. The room is captivated, entirely frozen by the spectacle of a man being publicly stripped of his fake armor. Trevon is shaking his eyes wide and pleading quietly, begging me to stop. I look back at him and tell him that his upcoming promotion is officially canceled, his career at Sterling Capital is over, and his useless wife just bought the entire building. The heavy wooden gavel remains suspended in the air. The mocking laughter of 200 wealthy executives bounces off the gilded walls of the crystal room. Trevon is basking in the glow of his own perceived dominance, his white teeth flashing under the bright stage lights as he waits for anyone to shout out $50 and complete my public humiliation. I sit perfectly still in my cheap beige dress, feeling the coarse synthetic fabric against my skin, my hands folded neatly in my lap. I do not look away from him. I hold his gaze, letting him savor the absolute peak of his arrogance, knowing he is standing on a trapdoor. $3 million. The voice is a low, resonant baritone, but it strikes the ballroom with the concussive force of a physical blow. The words slice through the ambient noise, commanding immediate and absolute obedience. The roaring laughter is instantly extinguished. It does not fade out gracefully. It chokes and dies in the throats of the city's elite. The silence that follows is so profound, so thick and suffocating, that you could hear a single champagne flute clink on the far side of the massive room. Every single head in the venue turns simultaneously toward the VIP alcove at the back of the hall. Xavier steps out of the velvet-lined shadows and into the brilliant cascading light of the chandeliers. He does not rush. He carries himself with the predatory grace of a man who owns every room he enters. His custom-tailored midnight blue suit is immaculate, and his posture radiates an unshakable authority. He holds his white bidding paddle high above his head, the bold black numbers printed on the card facing the stage. I watch Trevon's face from my seat at table 4. The transformation is absolutely spectacular. His smug, triumphant smile does not just fade, it melts off his face as if he has been splashed with boiling water, replaced instantly by a mask of sheer, unadulterated terror. He recognizes Xavier immediately. Every financial executive in the city knows that face. This is the billionaire chief executive officer of Apex Solutions. This is the savior Trevon has been desperately praying to for the last 6 months. This is the man who holds the absolute fate of Sterling Capital and Trevon's impending promotion entirely in the palm of his hand. At the table next to mine, Jamal suddenly sits up straight, his fork clattering loudly against his porcelain plate. The blood drains completely from his face as he stares at the billionaire walking into their charity auction. Chloe stops snickering. Her cruel smile vanishes, replaced by a look of sheer confusion, as she glances between Xavier, her panicked husband, and me. Over by the executive bar, Jasmine freezes in place, her hand dropping slowly from her diamond earrings as the atmosphere in the room shifts from a comedic roast to a corporate hostage situation. Trevon grips the sides of the mahogany podium. I can see his knuckles turning stark white from the pressure. A visible sheen of cold sweat breaks out across his forehead, ruining his perfectly styled hair. His mind is scrambling desperately, trying to calculate why a tech billionaire is participating in a degrading joke at a mid-level charity auction. Trevon swallows hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously against his tight silk collar. He tries to salvage the moment, attempting to pivot back to his charismatic persona, but his voice shakes violently as he leans into the microphone. He forces a weak, pathetic chuckle that sounds like a dying engine. He stammers, addressing Xavier with a sickening level of subservience. He tells Mr. Xavier that he is incredibly honored by the generous bid, but assures him that he was only making a harmless joke about the wife. He insists that Xavier certainly does not have to play along with the gag, attempting to laugh it off as a bit of harmless corporate banter. Trevon's arrogance evaporates completely, leaving behind nothing but a panicked, groveling employee, terrified of offending his potential new boss. He is desperately trying to protect his fragile career, completely blind to the fact that his career ended the moment he handed me that cheap beige dress. Xavier does not laugh. He does not even smile. He lowers the bidding paddle to his side and begins to walk straight down the center aisle of the ballroom. The sea of wealthy executives parts for him, immediately stepping back and pulling their chairs out of his way with a sudden profound reverence. Men who were just throwing their wealth around, like confetti, are now shrinking back, completely intimidated by the sheer weight of Xavier's presence. He walks with deliberate, measured steps, his dark eyes locked entirely on me. He does not look at the stage. He does not look at the crowd. He looks at the woman sitting in the clearance rack dress with a wet wine stain on the hem, and he offers me a subtle, respectful nod. Xavier stops right in front of the stage, positioning himself directly between my table and the podium. He finally looks up at Trevon, and the expression on his face is one of profound, absolute disgust. He does not need a microphone. His voice carries effortlessly across the silent ballroom, striking Trevon like a physical lash. He states clearly and firmly that he is not bidding on a wife. He looks Trevon up and down, dismissing him as a completely insignificant obstacle. Xavier declares to the entire room that he is bidding $3 million for a single hour of this woman's consulting time. Trevon's brain visibly short-circuits. He physically recoils from the podium, his mouth opening and closing without a single sound coming out. He cannot compute the words. Consulting time. His mind is desperately trying to reconcile the billionaire standing in front of him with the woman he forced to stay quiet and stay hidden. He looks at me, his eyes wide and pleading, begging for an explanation to a puzzle he is too arrogant to solve. The entire hierarchy of their toxic little world has just been flipped upside down, and gravity is about to do the rest of the work. Xavier turns his back on my terrified husband and faces the elite crowd preparing to deliver the final devastating blow. Xavier turns his attention away from the trembling man at the podium and faces the sea of elite executives. He does not ask for a microphone. True power never needs to amplify itself to be heard. He projects his voice with the effortless authority of a man accustomed to directing global markets. He tells the room that they have spent the entire evening throwing their wealth around like spare change, utterly blind to the fact that a true titan has been sitting quietly among them. He raises a hand and gestures directly toward my table. "Ladies and gentlemen," Xavier says, the absolute certainty in his tone demanding complete obedience from the crowd. "Allow me to introduce Kendra. She is not a punchline. She is the billionaire founder and sole architect of Nova Analytics. She is my newest business partner and one of the most brilliant technological minds I have ever had the privilege of meeting." A collective gasp ripples through the massive ballroom. It is a physical sound, a sudden sharp intake of breath from 200 people who suddenly realize the gravity of their mistake. But Xavier is not finished. He holds his ground and delivers the final devastating blow with surgical precision. He announces that as of 9 o'clock this morning, Apex Solutions finalized a massive corporate acquisition. He informs the stunned executives of Sterling Capital that their failing firm has been bought out to save them from imminent bankruptcy. And then he reveals the terms of the deal. He states clearly that as part of the acquisition, I demanded and received majority shareholder rights. As of today, I am the supreme owner of the very firm Trevon and his brother currently work for. The silence that follows is absolute. The sheer magnitude of the power shift sucks the oxygen right out of the crystal room. At the table next to mine, the reality of the situation hits Chloe like a freight train. The smug, condescending sneer is wiped entirely off her pale face. She sits completely paralyzed. The crystal champagne flute slips through her perfectly manicured fingers. It hits the polished marble floor and shatters violently into 100 pieces. The sharp breaking of glass rings out across the dead quiet ballroom, a deeply satisfying manifestation of her shattered illusion. All of her racial and social microaggressions, all of her desperate attempts to assert dominance over me evaporate in an instant. She is nothing but the wife of a failing employee, and I am the woman who owns the building. Beside her, Jamal looks like he is going to physically be sick. His jaw literally drops, his mouth hanging open as he stares at me in sheer horror. The arrogant man who laughed while his brother mocked my data entry job now realizes that his entire financial future, his pension, and his daily livelihood rest entirely in the palm of my hand. He knows his division is bleeding money, and he knows that I know it too. Across the room by the executive bar, Jasmine takes a rigid step backward. Her hands fly up to cover her mouth. The flawless 2-carat diamond earrings she is wearing suddenly look incredibly heavy. The luxurious fantasy she bought into is dissolving right in front of her eyes. She realizes with crushing clarity that she has been sleeping with a man who is not a wealthy, powerful executive, but a massive corporate liability who is utterly bankrupt and entirely at the mercy of his own wife. She is parading around in jewelry funded by a man whose pockets are completely empty, and the woman she tried to humiliate is the one who controls his paychecks. Up on the stage, Trevon turns ghostly pale. The blood drains completely from his face, leaving his skin a sickly grayish hue. He looks like a man who has just been handed his own death sentence. He is sweating profusely, the expensive fabric of his tailored suit clinging to his shaking frame. He looks at Xavier, then looks down at me. His mind is frantically trying to connect the submissive, obedient woman he left at home with the ruthless corporate conqueror Xavier, just introduced to the world. The cognitive dissonance is breaking him. He is trapped in a nightmare of his own making, realizing that every single insult, every stolen dollar, and every public humiliation was just adding fuel to the fire that is about to burn his life to the ground. I do not rush. I take a slow, deliberate breath, letting the absolute terror in the room wash over me. I push my chair back and stand up. I reach down and smooth my hands over the cheap, scratchy beige fabric of the clearance rack dress Trevon forced me to wear. I look down at the wet spot on the hem where Chloe deliberately spilled her white wine. What was meant to be a symbol of my subjugation and poverty is now the ultimate symbol of my absolute victory. I am wearing a discount dress, and I am the most powerful person in the room. I hold my head high, my posture radiating an unshakable confidence, and I begin to walk toward the stage. The sea of wealthy executives parts for me immediately. Men and women in designer gowns and bespoke tuxedos step back, clearing a wide path, pulling their chairs out of my way with a sudden, profound reverence. They look at me with undeniable fear and deep respect. The clicking of my heels echoes rhythmically against the marble floor, a steady, confident beat marching toward the podium. I ascend the velvet-lined stairs to the stage. I stand right beside my husband. He is practically vibrating with panic, his chest heaving as he struggles to breathe. I do not look at the crowd right away. I turn my head and look Trevon dead in the eye. I see the complete and utter collapse of his fragile masculinity. He knows he has lost everything. He knows the useless wife he tried to auction off for $50 just bought his entire world. And he knows I'm about to take the microphone and finish the job. I reach out and wrap my fingers around the cold metal of the microphone stand. Trevon tries to hold on to it, a pathetic instinct to maintain some semblance of control, but his grip is completely weak. I pull the microphone from his sweaty palm effortlessly. He takes a staggering step back, shrinking under the harsh, bright stage lights. The silence in the crystal room is absolute. 200 of the most powerful people in the city are holding their breath, waiting for the useless wife to speak. I look out over the sea of faces, observing the wide eyes and parted lips of the financial elite. Then I turn my body slightly, so I am facing Trevon, but speaking directly into the microphone. $50, I say. My voice rings out crystal clear, echoing off the high vaulted ceilings of the ballroom. I do not shout. I do not let a single ounce of hysterical emotion bleed into my tone. I speak with the cold surgical precision of a woman who has already won the war. You asked the room if I was worth $50. I find that incredibly ironic, Trevon, considering that is exactly the amount of money you left me with when you drained our joint savings account yesterday morning. Trevon opens his mouth, but nothing comes out. He looks like a cornered animal, his chest heaving as he struggles to process the reality of his own destruction. I turn my gaze back to the crowd. I tell the senior executives of Sterling Capital exactly who they have been grooming for upper management. I strip away his bespoke suits and his expensive bourbon. I tell them about a man who finances his fake corporate persona by stealing from his own household. I raise my hand and point directly at the brand new gold Rolex gleaming on his shaking wrist. I inform the board of directors that his luxury watch was purchased with funds meant to sustain our family, a desperate attempt to mask his own glaring professional insecurities. Then I let my eyes drift over to the executive bar. I lock eyes with Jasmine in her plunging crimson gown. I do not name her, but I make my point with devastating accuracy. I tell the silent ballroom that Trevon has been consistently misusing company time and redirecting supposed client networking budgets to finance a secret affair with a junior staff member. I describe the 2-carat flawless diamond earrings he purchased less than 48 hours ago. I watch the senior partners of his firm exchange furious, disgusted glances. Low murmurs begin to ripple through the front tables. Trevon is not just a terrible husband, he is a massive corporate liability. I turn my attention back to Trevon, drilling into his professional failures. I tell him that as the new majority shareholder, my first act was to run a comprehensive algorithmic audit on his specific division. I lay out his incompetence for everyone to hear. I cite the exact staggering figures of the toxic commercial real estate debts his team has been desperately trying to hide from the board. I expose the bloated expense reports, the fabricated client dinners, and the catastrophic mismanagement of capital that brought Sterling Capital to the brink of total bankruptcy. I tell the room that a man who cannot even balance his own personal checkbook, a man who relies entirely on deceit to function, has absolutely no business handling billions of dollars in client assets. Trevon's knees actually buckle. He catches himself on the edge of the mahogany podium, struggling to pull air into his lungs. He looks at me with eyes so wide and terrified they almost look hollow. He whispers my name, a pathetic broken plea for mercy that only the two of us can hear. He begs me to stop. I look at him with a gaze completely devoid of pity. I tell him that I spent 5 years shrinking myself to fit into his shadow. I made myself small so he could feel tall. I let his family disrespect me, let him mock my career, and let him treat my brilliant technological empire as if it were a silly little hobby to keep me busy. I lean closer to the microphone, ensuring my final words carry the weight of absolute finality. You wanted to auction me off tonight, Trevon. You wanted to prove to this room that you were an untouchable apex predator, and I was just an accessory you could discard for a cheap laugh. But you fundamentally misunderstood the math. You do not own me. You do not own anything. You are standing on a stage paid for by a firm that is completely bankrupt, wearing a watch you cannot afford, chasing a promotion that no longer exists. I take a step closer to him, lowering the microphone to my side so my voice is meant only for him and the first row of executives. I tell him his career at Sterling Capital is officially over. I tell him he is fired effective immediately by the direct order of the majority shareholder. I hand the microphone back to him. It slips through his trembling fingers and crashes onto the wooden stage with a loud, jarring feedback screech. The crowd is stunned into absolute silence as Trevon collapses to his knees, finally realizing the useless wife he tried to sell for $50 now holds his entire ruined life in the palm of her hand. The feedback screech of the dropped microphone acts as a starting gun. The paralysis gripping the crystal room shatters instantly. The absolute silence dissolves into a chaotic tidal wave of frantic whispers, gasps, and panicked murmurs as the financial elite scramble to process the massive power shift they just witnessed. Cellular phones are already being pulled from tuxedo pockets. Senior partners are frantically typing messages to their legal teams. The social hierarchy of the entire room has just been violently rearranged, and everyone is desperate to secure their footing in the new regime. Trevon scrambles up from the wooden stage floor. The blinding confidence he wore just 10 minutes ago has completely evaporated. He looks like a man waking up in the middle of a nightmare. He reaches out toward me, his hands shaking uncontrollably, but he does not dare touch me. He stumbles over his own feet, his breathing shallow and rapid. He begs me to step off the stage. He pleads for just 5 minutes of my time away from the glaring eyes of the crowd. He gestures frantically toward the heavy mahogany doors leading to the private VIP suites at the back of the ballroom. I look at the pathetic shell of the man who just tried to auction me off for $50. I do not argue. I simply nod and begin walking. The crowd parts for me once again as I make my way off the stage and across the marble floor. Trevon follows closely behind me, shrinking away from the judging stares of his colleagues. We walk through the heavy doors and step into a private VIP lounge. The room is opulent, decorated with dark leather sofas, dim ambient lighting, and walls lined with rare vintage wines. The moment the heavy wooden door clicks shut behind us, cutting off the noise of the ballroom, Trevon absolutely falls apart. He drops the tough corporate shark persona entirely. He rushes toward me, his hands reaching out to grab my arms desperately, trying to pull me into an embrace. He calls me baby. He tells me this is all just a massive misunderstanding. He begs me to go back out there and tell the executives that Xavier was just playing an elaborate prank. He insists that we are a team, that we built this life together, and that I cannot possibly mean what I said on that stage. His voice cracks as he attempts to manipulate my emotions, utilizing the same gaslighting tactics he has relied on for 5 entire years. He tells me he loves me. He tells me I am his whole world. I take a slow, deliberate step back, forcing his hands to drop to his sides. I look at his sweating face, his ruined hair, and his desperate, pleading eyes. I feel absolutely nothing. There is no anger left in my body, only the cold, clean satisfaction of a completed transaction. I tell him to stop talking. My voice is quiet, but it commands the room completely. I tell him that his performance is over and the audience has already gone home. I calmly open my sleek designer clutch. I reach inside and pull out a thick, heavy manila envelope. I hold it out in front of me. Trevon stares at the envelope, his eyes darting back and forth between the thick paper and my face. He asks what it is, his voice barely a whisper. I tell him it is the exact cost of his success. I drop the envelope onto the glass coffee table between us. I tell him those are legally binding divorce papers drawn up by the most ruthless corporate family attorneys in the state. I explain the terms with absolute clarity. He will sign away any and all claims to my assets, my companies, and my private wealth. He will walk away from our marriage with exactly what he brought into it, which is absolutely nothing. Trevon shakes his head violently. He tells me he will never sign them. He puffs out his chest, trying to summon one last fraction of his dying ego. He tells me I cannot force him to leave empty-handed. He threatens to drag out the divorce proceedings for years, claiming he will take half of my 8-figure buyout because we are legally married. He tries to leverage the very law he has been breaking for the past 6 months. I do not blink. I lean forward, resting my hands on the glass table, closing the distance between us. I look directly into his panicked eyes. I tell him he has exactly 2 options. He can sign the divorce papers right now and walk away with a clean break. Or, I tell him my very first act as the majority shareholder tomorrow morning will be authorizing a forensic audit of his entire corporate expense history. Trevon stops breathing. His face turns the color of ash. I watch his throat swallow hard as the reality of my threat sinks into his bones. I do not stop there. I continue laying out his destruction. I tell him the audit will expose every single fraudulent dinner receipt, every fake networking trip, and every dollar of client funds he misappropriated to maintain his fake lifestyle. I tell him I will personally hand the audit reports over to the federal authorities. I tell him he will not just lose his job, he will face criminal fraud charges and spend the next decade in a federal prison. Then I deliver the final, fatal blow. I lean in a little closer, ensuring my voice is perfectly clear. I tell him I know everything about Jasmine. I tell him I know about the 2-carat diamond drop earrings. I know about the text messages, the weekend retreats, and the downtown luxury condo he planned to rent using stolen company funds. I watch the absolute devastation register in his eyes as he realizes there is no secret I have not uncovered. I have completely dismantled every single safety net he thought he possessed. I point to the manila envelope on the glass table. I tell him to sign the papers. I give him 10 seconds to choose between a quiet divorce and a highly publicized federal indictment. The remaining fragments of his ego shatter completely. Trevon's knees give out. He collapses heavily into one of the dark leather chairs, utterly broken. He reaches a shaking hand into his breast pocket and pulls out a gold pen. He leans over the glass table, his hands trembling so violently he can barely hold the instrument. He positions the tip of the pen over the signature line on the divorce papers, preparing to sign his entire life away. But before the ink can even touch the page, the heavy mahogany doors of the VIP room burst open. The heavy mahogany doors swing violently inward, crashing against the expensive wallpaper. Jamal and Chloe stumble into the private suite. They look like they have just sprinted through a burning building. The absolute panic radiating off them is palpable. Jamal is sweating right through the collar of his custom tuxedo, his chest heaving as he gasps for air. Chloe is trailing right behind him. The arrogant, strutting woman who paraded around the ballroom just 20 minutes ago has completely vanished. Her pristine white designer gown is rumpled, and the fake patronizing smile she always wears is stretched so tight across her pale face it looks like it might snap. They do not even look at Trevon. They step right past my husband, who is still slumped in the leather chair with a pen trembling in his hand. Jamal ignores his own brother's total breakdown because in the corporate world, loyalty only extends as far as the next paycheck. Jamal walks straight toward me, holding his hands up in a gesture of desperate surrender. He calls me by my first name, stretching the syllables with a sickening, unearned familiarity. Jamal begs. He tells me that whatever Trevon did is entirely his own fault. He actively throws his own flesh and blood directly under the bus, desperate to save his own skin. He admits what I already know from my algorithm. He confesses that his specific branch of Sterling Capital is bleeding money, but he swears he can turn it around. He pleads with me to look at his historic numbers, promising that if I just give him a quarter to restructure, he can make the division profitable again. He asks me to protect his job, reminding me that we are family and that family takes care of each other during transitions of power. I look at Jamal with absolute disgust. This is the same man who laughed heartily at his dining room table while Trevon mocked my data entry job. This is the man who built his entire ego on feeling superior to everyone in his orbit. Seeing him groveling, practically getting on his knees to beg for mercy from the woman he relentlessly underestimated is a pathetic sight. I do not say a word to him. I simply let him sweat. Seeing her husband failing to gain any traction, Chloe decides it is her turn to step up. She steps around Jamal and tries to play a card she has absolutely no right to hold. She attempts to play the sisterhood angle. She forces a nervous, trembling smile and takes a cautious step toward me, reaching out as if she is going to hold my hand. I give her a look so incredibly cold she freezes instantly in her tracks. Chloe drops her hand but keeps pushing her ridiculous narrative. She tells me that she knows the men in this family can be difficult. She actually tries to bond with me over the struggles of being a corporate wife. She says that women need to stick together in times like these, that we have to support one another against the boys' club. It takes a monumental amount of self-control not to laugh in her face. I look at this white woman who married into a successful black family and immediately decided she was the supreme matriarch. For 5 years, I had endured her relentless, calculated microaggressions. I remembered the way she would hand me her coat at family gatherings, like I was the hired help. I remembered the backhanded compliments about my natural hair, the snide remarks about my budget, and the sheer audacity of her entitlement. I take a slow, measured step toward Chloe. The nervous smile on her face drops completely as I invade her personal space. I speak with a voice as smooth and sharp as glass. I tell her that we are not sisters, we are not friends, and we are certainly not in any kind of alliance. I look down at the hem of my clearance rack dress, gesturing to the wet spot where she intentionally spilled her drink earlier this evening. I remind her of the exact words she said to me when she handed me her dirty dessert plates in her sprawling suburban kitchen 6 months ago. I do not let her look away. I force her to hold my gaze as I repeat her own insult right back to her. You wanted me to be comfortable doing nothing all day, Chloe, I say, letting the words hang in the heavy air of the VIP room. You told me it was brave of me to sit at home while the men handled the real pressure. I watch her eyes widen in absolute horror as the realization of her own cruelty comes back to haunt her. I step back, taking in the sight of both her and Jamal standing shoulder to shoulder in their ruined luxury, while I continue, my voice echoing off the dark wood-paneled walls. Starting tomorrow morning, doing nothing is exactly what your husband will be doing. Jamal, you are fired. The words hit them with the force of a physical strike. Jamal lets out a choked, desperate sound, grabbing his head as his entire financial reality collapses in real time. Chloe's fake composure shatters completely. Her face crumples, and she bursts into loud, gasping tears. She covers her face with her hands, sobbing uncontrollably, as she realizes her country club memberships, her luxury cars, and her entire superficial identity have just been wiped out with a single sentence. She is crying for her lost status, mourning the death of her unearned superiority. The room is a symphony of absolute destruction. Trevon is broken in his chair, staring blankly at the divorce papers. Jamal is hyperventilating near the doorway, and Chloe is weeping bitterly into her hands. I have systematically dismantled every single person who ever tried to make me feel small. I turn to pick up my designer clutch from the glass table, fully intending to leave them to choke on their own misery. But the drama of the night is not quite over. A shadow falls across the threshold of the VIP suite. The crying and the panic in the room suddenly hitch as a new figure steps into the open doorway. It is Jasmine. Jasmine stands framed in the doorway, the harsh bright light from the hallway spilling into the dimly lit VIP suite. Her plunging crimson gown, which seemed so triumphant and predatory just an hour ago out on the ballroom floor, now looks like a cheap Halloween costume. Her hands are clenched so tightly at her sides that her knuckles are white. She is breathing heavily, her chest rising and falling in rapid, erratic motions. It is immediately obvious to every single person in the room that she did not just arrive. She has been standing outside those heavy mahogany doors for quite some time. She heard every single word of my dismantling. She heard the relentless audit threats. She heard the brutal bankruptcy figures. She heard Jamal get fired. And she heard the cold, undeniable truth about the man she genuinely thought was her golden ticket to high society. Trevon looks up from the glass coffee table, his eyes darting wildly. He sees her standing there, and his broken brain desperately tries to grasp onto one final lifeline. He actually attempts to compose his ruined face, forcing his trembling muscles to recreate the charismatic mask that is already shattered beyond repair. He drops the gold fountain pen onto the table and takes a shaky, staggering step toward the door. He reaches out a trembling hand and calls her name. His voice is a pathetic whining sound that lacks any trace of the corporate alpha male he pretends to be. He attempts to use the exact same manipulative tone he just tried to use on me. He calls her baby. He tells her not to listen to a single word I just said. He promises her that he can explain everything, that he has a brilliant backup plan, and that the luxury downtown condo he promised her is still going to happen. It is a spectacular display of absolute delusion, a man drowning in the ocean trying to sell a glass of water. Jasmine does not step toward him. She physically recoils, her entire face contorting with a mixture of profound shock and absolute revulsion. She is 24 years old, but she possesses a razor-sharp instinct for self-preservation. She looks around the shattered state of the VIP room. She sees Jamal leaning heavily against the wood-paneled wall, hyperventilating and clutching his chest as his career flatlines. She sees Chloe, the supposed queen of suburban high society, sobbing so violently that her expensive makeup is running down her face in dark, muddy streaks. Then Jasmine looks at the thick manila envelope sitting on the glass table. She recognizes the divorce papers. She sees the final nail in the coffin of Trevon's fake wealth. The harsh reality of her situation crashes down on her all at once. She realizes that the luxurious future Trevon promised her was nothing but a hollow mirage built on stolen money. He is not a powerful executive moving effortlessly up the corporate ladder. He is a massive fraud heavily buried in toxic debt, completely reliant on a wife he openly mocked, and he is about to be terminated and investigated for federal corporate crimes. The lavish dinners, the weekend retreats, and the expensive promises were all funded by a woman he was actively betraying. Jasmine realizes that tying herself to him is not a step up the social ladder. It is a direct plunge into a catastrophic legal and financial abyss. Jasmine finally finds her voice. She does not scream, but her tone is sharp and dripping with absolute disgust. She looks Trevon up and down as if he is covered in filth. She tells him he is pathetic. She states clearly that he lied to her about his assets, his power, and his marriage. She tells him he is nothing but a broke, desperate man playing dress-up with his wife's bank account. Trevon stammers, taking another desperate step forward, begging her to just give him a chance to fix it. He reaches for her arm, telling her she is the only thing he has left in the world. The admission is the final straw. Jasmine looks at me, standing calmly by the table, radiating absolute control, and then she looks back at the broken man begging at her feet. She reaches up to her earlobes. Her fingers grasp the flawless 2-carat diamond teardrops that have been catching the ambient light of the suite all evening. She unclasps the backings with quick, angry motions. She pulls the diamonds free from her ears. She tells Trevon that she refuses to wear stolen jewelry bought by a man who cannot even afford to pay for his own groceries. Jasmine pulls her arm back and throws the diamonds as hard as she can directly at Trevon's chest. The heavy stones strike his wrinkled tuxedo shirt with a sharp thud. They bounce off his chest and hit the polished hardwood floor, skittering and rolling away under the dark leather sofas, like pieces of discarded trash. Trevon flinches, looking down at the scattered diamonds as if he cannot comprehend what is happening to him. Jasmine does not wait for him to recover. She turns on her stiletto heel, her crimson gown sweeping fiercely through the doorway. She walks out of the VIP suite and disappears down the brightly lit hallway without a single backward glance. She completely abandons him, cutting her losses and running far away from the sinking ship that is Trevon's life. Trevon is left utterly alone. He drops heavily to his knees on the hardwood floor, surrounded by the absolute wreckage of his own making. He is kneeling among the scattered diamonds he fraudulently purchased, the divorce papers that strip him of all his assets, and the weeping relatives who enabled his toxic behavior for years. He has lost his career, his wealth, his marriage, his mistress, and his pride in the span of 30 minutes. His fake empire has been burned down to the foundation, and there is absolutely nothing left but ash. I stand in the center of the room looking down at the absolute devastation. I feel a profound, overwhelming sense of peace wash through my entire body. There is no need for me to say another word. The total silence in the room is my ultimate victory. I reach down and pick up my simple, unbranded clutch from the glass table. I smooth my hands over the cheap beige fabric of my clearance rack dress one final time. I look at Trevon kneeling on the floor, staring blankly at the wall, completely destroyed by his own hubris. I do not offer him a goodbye. I turn on my heel, my steps steady and confident. I walk out of the VIP room, leaving the heavy mahogany doors open behind me. I walk down the long grand corridor, past the stunned executives still lingering in the ballroom, and out the grand front doors of the St. Regis Hotel. The cool night air hits my face, crisp and clean. I take a deep breath, stepping out into the dark, completely free and ready to build my new world. 3 months pass with the kind of rapid, absolute clarity that only comes when you cut dead weight from your life. The changing of the seasons brings a harsh, biting reality to the people who thought they were untouchable. I do not have to lift a single finger to ruin Trevon. Gravity and federal auditors do all the heavy lifting for me. The transition is incredibly fast and profoundly brutal. Trevon is no longer parading around the financial district in tailored wool suits. He is currently facing total, absolute bankruptcy. The forensic audit I authorized on my very first morning as majority shareholder ripped through his department like a Category 5 hurricane. Every fabricated expense report, every stolen client dollar, and every fraudulent networking trip was dragged out into the harsh light of day. The federal authorities were highly interested in the findings. To pay for the mounting mountain of legal fees required to keep himself out of a federal penitentiary, Trevon had to liquidate his entire fake life. The luxury German car he loved to show off was repossessed in the middle of the day in front of his former colleagues. The expensive gold Rolex that he drained my grocery budget to buy was pawned for a fraction of its value just to keep his defense attorney on a retainer. He was forced to move out of the suburban house we once shared, taking only what he could fit into a few cardboard boxes. He is now living in a tiny, cramped studio apartment on the far edge of the city. The walls are thin, the plumbing rattles, and there is no audience left to applaud his imaginary achievements. Jasmine blocked his number the very night of the gala and vanished into thin air, entirely unwilling to attach her youth to a sinking ship. He is utterly, completely alone, sitting in a tiny room, choking on the bitter ashes of his own massive ego. His family did not fare much better. Jamal and Chloe experienced a social and financial freefall that was spectacularly public. With Jamal terminated for gross incompetence and corporate mismanagement, their primary stream of income evaporated overnight. The sprawling suburban mansion where Chloe used to hand me dirty dessert plates currently has a massive bright red foreclosure sign hammered into the perfectly manicured front lawn. They had to severely downsize their lavish lifestyle, moving into a modest rented townhouse that Chloe would have openly mocked a year ago. Their social standing within our community has been utterly destroyed. The elite country clubs and high society charity boards that Chloe used to terrorize quietly revoked her memberships. The very same women who used to drink champagne with her now cross the street to avoid making eye contact. Jamal cannot secure a job at any reputable financial firm in the state because the industry is incredibly small, and no one wants to hire an executive who was publicly fired by his own sister-in-law for hiding toxic debt. Chloe actually had the audacity to call my private office line a month ago, leaving a tearful, rambling voicemail begging for forgiveness and asking for a temporary personal loan. I did not call her back. I simply deleted the message and went back to my work. The people who spent years looking down their noses at me, mocking my quiet existence, and treating me like an uneducated servant, are now looking up from the absolute bottom of the barrel. I received the final divorce decree on a crisp Tuesday morning. I sit at the expansive marble desk in my new home office. I hold the heavy legal document in my hands. Trevon signed away every single right to my assets, my companies, and my private wealth. He walked away from our marriage with exactly what he brought into it, which is absolutely nothing but his own unchecked arrogance. I sign my name on the final dotted line with a smooth, steady hand. I do not feel a single ounce of sadness or regret. I feel an overwhelming, profound sense of liberation. I place the pen down on the desk. I look out the window at the sprawling, vibrant city below me. I do not harbor any lingering hatred for Trevon, Jamal, or Chloe. Hate requires energy, and my energy is far too valuable to waste on people who are entirely bankrupt in every sense of the word. I simply close the chapter on them forever. I sever the final invisible cord that tied me to their toxic, exhausting world. I leave them entirely to the misery they built for themselves with their own two hands. They constructed a prison of lies, greed, and superficial entitlement, and now they have to sit in it for the rest of their lives. I turn away from the window, leaving them in the past, and I step forward to claim the extraordinary future I built. I push open the massive sliding glass doors of my home office and step out onto the sprawling private terrace of my new ultra-modern penthouse. The cool night air washes over me, carrying the electric energy of the city skyline spread out in every direction. From this height, the bustling downtown streets look like glowing rivers of gold and crimson. I walk over to the edge of the reinforced glass railing and look down at the financial district. Somewhere down there, in the cramped shadows of the city, Trevon is sitting in his tiny studio apartment, suffocating in the misery he curated for himself. But up here, the air is clean, the view is absolute perfection, and my peace of mind is completely untouchable. My phone buzzes softly in the pocket of my silk trousers. It is a secure message from Xavier. He is sending over the preliminary quarterly projections for Nova Analytics under the Apex Solutions umbrella. The numbers are staggering. The algorithm I built in the quiet isolation of my old suburban guest room has just exceeded our most aggressive profit estimates by 40% in a single fiscal quarter. My private bank accounts reflect a net worth that most people cannot even begin to comprehend. But the money is only a byproduct of the real victory. The true triumph is the absolute autonomy I have secured over my own life. Xavier and I have developed a formidable dynamic. There is a profound professional mutual respect between us, forged in the fires of that chaotic charity gala and solidified in boardroom strategy sessions. He recognizes my genius, and I respect his visionary leadership. We operate as absolute equals. There are industry rumors already swirling that our alliance is going to fundamentally reshape the global financial technology sector over the next decade. We are an unstoppable force moving forward, and there is an unspoken understanding between us that this partnership is only just beginning to reach its full devastating potential. I lean against the cool glass railing and raise my glass of sparkling water, watching the brilliant city lights reflect and dance on the surface of the crystal. I take a slow, deep breath and reflect on the absolute wildness of the journey that brought me to this exact balcony. 6 months ago, I was a woman shrinking herself to fit into the cramped, suffocating box of a toxic marriage. I was washing dirty dessert plates for a sister-in-law who viewed me as hired help. I was silently swallowing insults from a husband who used my grocery money to fund a secret affair with a junior analyst. They looked at my quiet demeanor and mistook my peace for weakness. They looked at my patience and calculated that I was nothing more than a useless accessory they could discard whenever they felt the urge to inflate their own pathetic egos. Trevon actually believed he could stand on a brightly lit stage in front of 200 wealthy executives and auction off my dignity for a cheap $50 laugh. He thought he was the ultimate apex predator, playing a clever little game. He never realized that the woman sitting quietly at table 4 had already rewritten the entire rulebook, bought the stadium, and locked all the doors from the outside. I did not just survive his humiliating auction block. I bought the whole damn building and evicted everyone who ever made me feel small. If there is one thing I have learned from burning down a fake life to build a real empire, it is the absolute terrifying power of moving in complete silence. You do not have to scream your worth from the rooftops to make it real. You do not have to constantly defend your value to people who are actively committed to misunderstanding you. When you know exactly who you are and what you are capable of, you do not need their applause. You do not need their validation. You let them mock you. You let them overlook you. You let them hand you their dirty dishes and offer you their backhanded compliments. You let them think they hold the upper hand while you quietly lay the bricks of your own fortress. There is a profound, untouchable strength in letting your actions speak for you. When you focus entirely on your own growth, your own intellect, and your own unshakable standards, you become immune to the petty noise of insecure people. Trevon, Jamal, and Chloe spent all their energy trying to project an illusion of wealth and superiority, completely blind to the fact that true power never needs to announce itself. I take one last look at the glittering skyline before turning back toward the warmth of my penthouse. My life is no longer dictated by anyone else's fragile insecurities. I am the sole architect of my future, surrounded by people who respect my mind and honor my boundaries. To anyone out there who feels underestimated, overlooked, or trapped by the weight of someone else's ego, remember this. Your silence is not weakness. Your patience is not surrender. Keep building your empire in the shadows. Keep sharpening your skills and securing your own safety net. Protect your peace. Recognize your absolute worth. And when the time is perfectly right, you step out into the light and you let your success be the loudest, most devastating sound in the room. The most profound lesson from Kendra's journey is the undeniable power of moving in absolute silence. When you truly know your own worth, you do not need to seek external validation or scream your accomplishments from the rooftops. Insecure people will always try to project their failures onto you and diminish your light to inflate their fragile egos. Let them constantly underestimate you. Use their arrogance as your camouflage while you quietly build your empire. True power is never loud or reactive. It is patient, calculated, and devastatingly precise when the time finally comes to step into the bright light. If this story resonated with your spirit, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share your own triumphant stories of reclaiming your absolute power in the comments below.